Alright, here we are in lesson 4 of the second module in this course, and in this video we're going to go ahead and focus on a different technique to block out the different parts of our character, because right now all we have is a fairly decent and smooth shape for the body, but this character that we have currently here on screen is basically made out of a bunch of different objects. So we're gonna get into more details of what a subtool is. I briefly mentioned this concept earlier on in the first module, but we're gonna get into a little bit more detail here, as well as how to block out different shapes with what is called a primitive or like basic geometrical shapes. All right, so let's go ahead and jump straight into it. I'm gonna switch here. All right, so here we are. This is where we left off, and as always, the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is load the custom UI that we're going to use for this lesson. So let's go ahead and click on Preference, Initialize, Load UI. You know all this already. So I'm going to go ahead and select the primitive blocking, and that's the one for this module and lesson 4. Let's click Open, and you might not notice anything too different. In fact, there's only one little change, and I'm just going to point it out here, which is this append button. Okay, this append button lives within the subtool palette, but it's something that I found to be really useful to have in the UI because it allows you to append new objects. So we're going to be using this quite a bit. You can also assign a shortcut to it, but we're going to get to shortcuts later on. It is part of customizing the UI, but not at this point. For now, we're going to concentrate on building our UI in the way that works and try to replace certain things with shortcuts that are very useful, like the control key to, if you remember in the previous video, to mask an area, invert the mask, and also clear the mask. So that sort of thing. All right, let me just clear this out, and let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Actually, I'm going to bring this back on just because I need to, maybe with a white color, or with a purple one is fine. Just to very briefly show you what we're going to do in this video. So right now what we have is a very basic shape of the body underneath our character, right? Something like that. So the idea now is to go ahead and block out things like the head, and we're going to use very primitive shapes, and that's the whole point of this this technique or this workflow. So the head is going to be a sphere, just a normal sphere, not a C-sphere, just a normal sphere. The same thing goes for the eyes. This part of the head, there's going to be a semi-sphere. We're also going to block out something like the scarf here, which will be a cylinder. What else? We could do a little bit of the backpack, which is going to be a cube. You know, so very basic shapes, cylinders, spheres, cubes, and what I want you to focus on, rather than, you know, following exactly the type of meshes that I'm going to be using and showing you, concentrate on the workflow and the process that we're going to use. It's a very simple process, very systematic, one step at a time. But if you get this right, the blocking right, it's all we need to move forward. So creating details in ZBrush, and this is something that I talk about a lot in all my online classes and the free classes that I do online, is that making details or adding details in ZBrush is such a easy thing to do that it shouldn't be the focus. It's very rewarding and it's very cool to actually add details, but getting this part right in the character, these primary shapes, is what really matters and what really sort of sells the idea of the character, how it's read in the screen, and, you know, the appeal that it has. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. I'm gonna clear this out, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with the head, so we have some good reference. So to start with the head, what I'm going to do now is click on Append, this new button from the UI, and this palette is essentially the same as this one, right? The difference is that from the append button, we can actually append a new mesh or a new tool or subtool into our subtool palette. Okay, so I'm going to leave the subtool open so that you can see what happens, and just for demonstration's sake, this append button is the one that I put in here. It's the same one. Okay, so you can do it from this button or from this one, but you know, this is just for easy access, and I reckon it's going to be easier for you to just click on that one, and that's it. You don't have to go into the subtool. So if I click on that, let's go ahead and start with the head, and we said the closest thing for at least the face part of the head is going to be a sphere. So we're going to concentrate on these 3D meshes. I'm going to click on C-Sphere 3D, and there we go. So now we have a massive head, but as you can see, we have a different subtool. So as I mentioned in the video that we talked about subtools, these are individual objects. So I can select the object from here, in this case the sphere, and we're going to go ahead and bring in the Gizmo 3D. So in this lesson we're going to get a little bit deeper into some of the things that the Gizmo 3D can do, and I'm going to bring it by selecting either the move, the scale, or rotate. Remember, any of these will bring the gizmo. There we go. And by default, because this is a new mesh, the gizmo is going to be perfectly centered to that sphere. Okay, we can toggle the body off by clicking on this icon here, and that's just temporarily hiding it, although in this case we actually need to see it so that we can place this properly. So let's go ahead and use the the y-axis to push this up, and I'm going to click on this scale tool in the middle, and that's going to scale everything proportional. All right, so that's going to sort of allow me to determine the size of the head, maybe a little bit bigger actually. And rotate, hold shift. Remember, if you hold shift, you snap to the next sort of camera view or the camera angle, and we can actually push this down. And let's go ahead and try to place the head the best way we can. Okay, and I'm just looking at the reference here, mainly at the distance between the bottom part of the kind of like the chin of the character and the shoulders. So this one needs to be a little bit lower, and move forward a tiny bit. All right, so that is the head of our character. So we're gonna keep it very simple. We're not gonna tweak the shape just yet. We're gonna just add the different objects that we need. All right, so let's go back to draw mode without the Gizmo 3D. And now we have two objects that make out our character. All right, I know that this looks pretty silly. It's almost like the equivalent of a stickman figure if you're drawing or teaching a kid how to draw. But this is very important that we move step by step, and that's the whole point of this course. It's very systematic so that you can apply it to anything else later on. So looking at this, at the reference that we have here, we have the eyes, which kind of have like an almond shape, maybe like a teardrop or something like that, but ultimately they are actual eyes, right? So we can do the same thing and just duplicate this mesh that we created to create the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and create just one. So instead of going and appending another sphere, which you can totally do, I'm just going to show you another way that we can continue adding meshes to block out our character, and that is by simply duplicating a mesh that you already have. So by selecting the sphere, right? And the way that you see selected is because it has this darker, outline around the subtool. I'm going to go down here where it says duplicate, and this is all of these tools, all of these buttons are related to the subtool palette, right? These are all living within the subtool palette. So I'm going to click duplicate, and right now we have a third object. And now having a third object in the subtool palette allows us to choose the object from what is called a pop-up window. So I'm going to press the letter N in my keyboard, and you get this little pop-up based on where your cursor is. So let me just put this out of the way, just to explain what this is. Right? So my cursor is here, and wherever I click with my cursor, whenever I press the letter N on your keyboard, right, it's going to bring up this pop-up that is essentially this version, or it's a version of the subtools. So now you can see the current subtool. It won't appear because it's the one that I have selected. So let's say it's an imaginary subtool here, but it's number 3. And then you have subtool number 2 and subtool number 1 in here. So this allows you to very quickly bring up the palette without the need to scroll through a bunch of subtools that you might have later on and select the one that you want. Okay, so that you can scale it, move it, or do anything that you want. Now, this is a very important concept, because the more subtools that we add down the track, the more complicated it's going to be, or at least know which one you are affecting. So I'm gonna clear this out and just show you very quickly. So I could be anywhere, press the letter N, select my body, and now here I'm in the body, or have the body selected. I want to go back to the head, select the head, and now the third one, and select the third one. Okay, and this little pop-up only happens because you have 3 or more subtools. So if you only have 2, you won't be able to access this pop-up, or if you have 1, well, there's no point of selecting a different one. Now, that's one of the ways of interacting with the multiple subtools. I'm going to show you a different one, in just a second, but right now I have a duplicate that lives exactly in the same place. So let's go ahead and use this for the eye, like I mentioned. Bring up the gizmo and making sure that my symmetry is off. I'm going to move this towards the left of the character, and I can use these white arrows just to freely move things around based on the camera or right or the angle. And I'm going to scale it down like so, and just try to position this in the right place. Again, don't worry too much about the shape. We are going to tweak that later on. This is essentially like setting up the armature that we did with the C-spheres, but obviously with, you know, primitives or simple shapes. All right, let's go back to draw. Now this eye, I'm going to leave it as it is, and if you want, you can just duplicate it and do another one. But for now, I'm just going to keep it as a single eye, and in the next video, I'm going to show you an interesting technique. So let's go ahead and continue adding shapes or primitive shapes. So we can do something like the scarf or this wrap around the neck. So for that, I'm going to go to append, and I'm going to add a cylinder. Okay, so now we have a cylinder. Again, we can use the subtool list to select the one that we want, just like that, or we can use the N to bring this up, and then we can choose the one that we want to edit. And this is important because you will be editing one subtool at a time. So with this one selected, let's go ahead and bring in the gizmo, and I'm going to scale this proportionally, move around, and let's go ahead and rotate it. So from this angle, if I snap the camera view to the side view, right, I can use this outer edge or this ring, the white one, to rotate it in this x-axis. So I can just try to position this, maybe scale it in the y-axis, something like that. I think it looks close enough. Maybe a little bit higher, and maybe a little bit fatter as well. Maybe not that much. And again, you can just play with this for as long as you want to, just making sure that this looks good and it reads well from every angle is the important part. Not the fact that they are simple objects. We need to read this as a whole, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and continue adding maybe the backpack and the little sleeping bag. So for the sleeping bag, let's go ahead and append another cylinder. Select that. Go into the gizmo, and I'm going to show you another interesting tool that is part of the gizmo. So if you start rotating, as soon as you start rotating, you can see some numbers at the bottom part of the gizmo, right? So right now I'm in 26.4256 degrees, but if you hold the shift key on your keyboard, it will snap to integer numbers every 5 degrees. So we can go ahead and find minus 90, or the other way around, we can just do 90 and let go, and that way we are 100% sure that this is being rotated 90 degrees. So that's what we want. We can scale it like this in proportion, and now let's scale it in the y-axis. So as you can see, the modifiers in ZBrush are very important. The shift key, the control key, the alt key, all of these three become really important as you progress in the course. And you know, as you get familiar with ZBrush, you'll see that they are very important, and they create they make your life a lot easier just because they modify you know, some of the tools. All right, so now that we have this here, again, this is just the shape, you know, making sure proportion wise is looking good and the silhouette from every angle is actually working. Now I'm going to show you a different way to add the next part or the next mesh, which is going to be kind of like the backpack. So again, there's many ways to do different things in ZBrush. I'm going to show you a few different ways, but I'm going to try to stick with some of the methods that I reckon are going to be very easy for you to remember and, you know, speed up the workflow in general. So right now I have this cylinder selected. I'm going to increase the visible count so you can see more of this tool. And what I want to do now is simply duplicate it. So I'm going to click duplicate. So now I have another cylinder that lives exactly in the same spot. Bring in the gizmo and let's just push it down. All right. So now that I have this cylinder, I actually need a cube, not a cylinder, so that we can block in the backpack, right? So you might be thinking, well, isn't it easier to just append an actual cube and then modify it. Again, that's totally valid option. You can go for that, but I want to show you a different one. And I want to introduce the cog icon here, the first option or the first icon of the Gizmo 3D, right? The first one, if I click on it, you'll get this pop-up window. So here we have some deformers, and we're going to get to that in a second when we do some of the more complex shapes in this blocking. And at the top, you have a bunch of different primitives that you can actually tweak from the Gizmo 3D. So that's why I did it this way. So I just duplicated the cylinder because I can change to anything that I want. So regardless of which object you duplicate, you can change it to anything. You can actually duplicate the body and convert that into a cube. So if I click the cog icon again, I'm going to click cube. And now this cube is really, really, really tiny. Okay, so you might not be able to see it here. So if I get closer, hopefully you can see it's pretty tiny. So what I'm going to do now is click on the cog icon again. And right now I'm currently selecting the polycube. But if I switch back to the Gizmo 3D, that's going back to the Gizmo. So I'm going to click on the proportional scale and then just scale this up. And we can go back to the polycube. Right? Going back to the polycube allows you to very quickly change the subdivisions and some other stuff. So for example, if I select, let's see, the cylinder, it allows you, I'm going to also turn on polyframe. Remember, this is the one that allows you to see the subdivisions and the actual polygons. And you have these cones in here. Those are controllers to determine what is the amount of resolution in the x-axis and in the z-axis. So I can increase the subdivision, right, just by clicking and dragging. So you can actually, just by moving this one down and this one down as well, you can create a very simple cube. So you can do that, or you can actually use the cube, so polycube, and do the same thing. You can increase, decrease the amount of polygons. So I think for this, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as it is, as the default one. But I just wanted to show you what these little cones are, and they're going to be different depending on which one you choose, which polygon you choose, which base mesh or primitive you choose, and they're going to get a bit more complex when we get to the modifiers. But let me just go back to Gizmo 3D, and I'm just going to do a quick recap of what I did. But basically, this is what this blocking is all about. Trying to figure out which area in your model or in your sketch that you're trying to copy. In this case, we're sticking with the concept that I provided with the course. But if you are later on, if you're following something different, it's just a matter of figuring out which simple shape represents each part of the model and then just blocking it in. All right, I'm gonna go back to draw. So like I said, I'm just gonna do a quick recap of what I just did here. I duplicated this mesh, the cylinder. So I'm gonna just do it again, duplicate. I have that selected. I'm actually gonna bring in the gizmo and move it out so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So this is just a duplicate, in essence a different subtool. I'm gonna go to the cog icon, click on polycube, and this time it's bigger now because we already tweaked the size. And these controllers or these cones allow you to change the amount of subdivisions. Okay, so you can do a very, very simple cube. And once you're happy with this, or how many subdivisions you have, go back to the cog icon, and you have two switches here that allows you to switch between the actual polygon or primitive that you're editing and back to the Gizmo 3D. So clicking the Gizmo 3D, you're back at the usual gizmo, and that allows you to change things on the fly. All right, so let's click on draw, back to this model. And if you want to remove a subtool, we can go ahead and select it and go to delete. Okay, now before I delete it, I want to show you that you can rearrange them any way that you want by clicking on this area where roughly where the name of the subtool is, and just clicking and dragging allows you to update or change the position of it. This is not going to affect anything in terms of how it looks in the model, but it's just good to keep it organized. So I'm going to take this one, which is the current one selected. You can also tell which one is selected if you have the polyframe on. That's another reason why I like to keep it in the UI. So if I leave it on and I select the different subtools, you'll see they get updated with the color. You can see the color of their different subtools. So I'm going to select that one again and go down to where it says delete, click once, and delete is an undoable operation. So if you delete a subtool, you won't be able to get it back. So make sure that you know for sure which one you're deleting. So now that I press delete, I get this pop-up. I'm gonna click OK, and now it's gone. All right, so this is kind of like the basics of blocking out these shapes. You'll see it's pretty simple, but we're starting to get an idea of how this works. In fact, now looking at it from the distance, I would actually like to take my cube, bring in my gizmo, and scale it a little bit in the x-axis and pull it down like so. All right, just to make it slightly bigger or taller. And also I'm going to select the cylinder and I'm going to push it back a little bit more. All right, and just by adjusting this, I can see kind of like the weight of the character. So I think that the head is a little bit too forward. So what I'm going to do is select my head that I have in here. Right, I'm going to look at it from a different angle and I'm going to push it back just a tiny bit. Now here's the next thing that I want to show. Because the gizmo is basically editing one subtool at a time, you might encounter this problem that you want to reposition your head, but you don't want to mess with the position of the eye that you already got right. So how do you go ahead and move multiple subtools at once? Okay, you can of course move this one, then go to the eye and move it again, right? But that's not necessarily ideal if you already have the position of the eye that you like. So I'm gonna undo that, right? And this is another thing that I want to mention. The undo history is on a per subtool basis. So I have to undo in this tool that I moved it, but also I have to go back to the head and undo it. So each one of these objects or subtools, they have its own undo history. So be aware of that. All right, so here is the head and the eye. And just for, again, organizational purposes, I'm going to rename them and show you how to rename a subtool. So selecting it, I'm going to go to rename, click on it, and I'm just going to call this head, capitals. And then I'm going to select this one and I'm going to rename it eye. Okay, it's just one eye. And you can go ahead and rename the other ones. For now, I just want to show you very quickly how you can do that. So how do you move multiple subtools at once? In this case, I just want to move the head and the eye, right? And in the Gizmo 3D, you have this little icon here, which is, if you hover over, ZBrush is going to give you a hint. And this is another great thing about ZBrush, that it gives you hints every time, right? If you hover over things or if you press Control, you have more information. But this one is very simple, right? Hovering over this icon that has like a tick box and a layer, it says Transpose All Selected Tools. So right now it's set to 1. If I go ahead and click it, now you have an icon that looks kind of like, the same thing, but it has 3 tick boxes. In other words, indicating that we can now move all of them at once. Okay, so great. Now we have these 3 boxes. I can go ahead and move it. But the problem is that it's moving the entire set of subtools. So I'm going to undo that. That is the difference, right? So you can move one at a time or you can move multiple. But if you have multiple, it's going to move all of them that you have visible. So there's ways around it. There's like actually a few ways that you can go about it. So you can hide, for example, the body. You can hide everything except the one that you want to move. And when you move it and you turn on everything, that's the effect that you get, right? So it's only going to move everything at once, but everything that is visible. But that's not great because you won't be able to see like visually, you won't be able to see where you're placing things. So let me undo that again. And I'm going to show you the best way, or the way that I think is the best for the workflow. Like I said, there's always 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to do the same thing in ZBrush. Is whatever works for you and whatever is ideal for the workflow that you're using. So the way that this works is using selection. So I'm going to introduce you to the selection tools. So the selection tools, they live within the Control and the Shift key. Okay, so I'm going to move this out of the way just a second to give you a quick reminder of the modifiers that we talked about and what they are. So we have the Shift key, we have the Control key, and we have now the Shift and the Control key together. All right, so let's just do it with white. So the Shift is going to access the smooth brushes. The control key or the control modifier is going to access the mask brushes, right? And if you combine the shift and the control together, so basically pressing the control and the shift together, is going to access the selection tools or the selection brushes. So this is one of the key things about ZBrush, that you can do a lot of things just by combining three modifiers: the shift, control, and the alt modifier that we already talked about. But that the alt key is more relevant to the sculpting process and the brushes. But the shift, the control, and the shift and control have access to a bunch of different tools that are essential for this specific process. All right, so let me just show you in practice what they do. So I'm gonna go ahead and hold control and shift, and you'll see my cursor. Actually, let's make it a little bit larger. Control and shift, the cursor changes to a white color, and it also shows like a little selection lasso icon thing. So I'm gonna hold control and shift, click and drag, and I'm just dragging with the mouse when I hold control and shift. Whatever I do or whatever I select within this area is going to be visible. Now, if I want to hide a part of a subtool or a tool, I can just add the Alt key to the mix. So I'm holding Control and Shift, and then I'm going to press the Alt key, right? So now you see the selection changes to this red area. So now that means that whatever is within this area is going to be hidden, okay? So we're going to talk more about the selection tools, and we're going to be using them quite a bit later on. But for now, it's important to understand how to access them, because this is how we're going to tell ZBrush which subtools we want to maintain or we want to keep when we move them all together. So let's go ahead and rotate, hold shift to snap the camera, bring in the gizmo again, and we have this icon toggled on, so indicating that we're going to move multiple subtools. But then I'm going to go ahead and bring in the selection tools with Control, Shift, and I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to hover over or extend the selection tool over the eye and the head. It doesn't have to wrap everything around, as long as there is something that we can see within that green area, okay? And as soon as I do that and let go, you see we get this hash line, or these areas with a hash line. And this means that anything that is sort of like rendered with this pattern is not going to be movable. So in other words, anything that is, that you can see the normal way is going to be moved when we move with this selection. Okay. What's great about this technique is that you can, for example, include or exclude parts of the selection. So you can hold Control and Shift, and let's say I want to also move the backpack. So Control and Shift, click and drag, and whatever is within this green ridge, now this is also going to be moved. So I can go ahead and do this, right? Let's undo that. But obviously I don't want to move them, so I'm going to remove them from the selection. So Control, Shift, click and drag, and I'm going to add the modifier, the third modifier, the Alt key, to make it red. And instead of adding, it's going to subtract from the selection. There we go. So now we can go ahead and move the head with the eye. Okay, so I think that looks a little bit better, right? So let's go ahead and toggle this off again and go back to draw. And also this looks like this because we have the polyframe on. Let's toggle it off. And now I would like to just reposition a little bit this the scarf. So I'm going to select it, bring in the gizmo, maybe scale it down a bit, rotate it, and push it back. So as you can see, this is all about the tweaking and checking all the angles and checking all the areas to make sure that the character reads well. It's also a good practice to sort of like zoom out quite a bit so that you can see it as a kind of like a little thumbnail and see if it reads well. Okay, that's just a little extra tip, nothing to do with the workflow. Now let's go ahead and continue adding the more complex parts like the mushroom head, as well as this hand, or like the basis for this, the defense hand. Oh, I don't know what do you call it, but the one with the claws. All right, so we're gonna start with the mushroom head, and for that we're gonna bring in, a sphere, because the closest thing that I can see is half a sphere. So we're gonna bring in a sphere, and we're gonna halve it or split it in half. So to do that, we're gonna go ahead and append a sphere. And again, we can go ahead and press the letter N, and we can now see the names. So that's why it's important to name things as we go. But I want to show you another selection method that allows you to deal with subtools quite easily, and you don't have to depend on the subtool list here or the pop-up with the letter N. And it's as simple as pressing the Alt modifier and clicking on the new subtool, right? So right now I have the cylinder selected, and if I want to select the new tool or the new subtool, sorry, you can press the letter Alt on your keyboard and click once on the next subtool. So that is probably the most useful shortcut in terms of workflow. You can go ahead and select the body, holding Alt, click on the body, and now you can just see the body, or select the body, sorry, or select the head, Alt, click. So as you can see, the modifiers in ZBrush are essential to speed up the workflow. So we have Alt, Shift, and Control. So with Alt, I can just move between different subtools, and as I change or holding Alt and click, you see how they change as well in here. So that's how I'm going to select the new sphere for the head. Alt, click on it, bring in the gizmo, and I'm going to move this sort of like there. Actually, let's move it a little bit higher so that we can see what we're going to do. All right, so we need to sort of like cut this in half. So again, there's many ways to do it in ZBrush, and I'm going to show you a few alternatives later on the track that have to do more with the sculpting and clipping. But for now, I'm going to stick with the tools that the gizmo give me. So we have the cog icon here, and within the cog icon we have some deformers. So these are essential for the blocking with primitives, or this process or this technique that we're using. So one of the deformers that I want to use to achieve that sort of like flat area of the sphere is actually the flatten deformer. So I'm going to click on flatten to select it, and as soon as I do that, you'll see I get again all of these controllers, but I have a bunch more orange ones that are, it started to look a little bit more complex. And this might be a little bit, hard to understand at first, but it's actually a very simple system. And once you get your head around how they work, it's going to be very, very easy. So essentially what this does is creating a kind of like a volume cube around this sphere. And each one of these cones is concerned about an axis of the volume. So because I want to flatten this sphere, I can take this cone, click and drag upwards. And now I'm just flattening the sphere interactively, which is pretty cool. So I can just do something like this, for example, and you'll see it's on a flat area here. This is what we have, a flat area. All right, so I'm happy with this. If you wanted to do, something more interesting for the scarf, you can do the same thing, but with two controllers, right? And what's great about this is that it's interactive or it's non-destructive. So if I don't like this, I can just take the cone and do this sort of thing, and so on and so forth. You can flatten it from a different angle, or you can actually extend outside of the volume, and it creates this sort of effect from a simple sphere, right? So very powerful stuff. So if you started to do this and you started messing around with some of these tools, you might want to reset how this was in the first place. So you can go to the cog icon, and then you have reset and full reset. So the full reset is just going to go back to the original, and just the reset is going to reset the controllers to 0. So this will make more sense with other modifiers or different deformers. I'm just going to go ahead and click reset, and there we go. It's back to normal. So I'm going to go ahead and hold shift to snap the camera to the front and flatten this out like that. And I think that looks all right. Let's click on the cog icon, and instead of just going back to the Gizmo 3D, I'm going to accept these changes. So if I click accept, then this modification that we did to the sphere is going to be kept as it is. So let's go ahead and click accept, and now we are back to the Gizmo 3D. Now this in the reference that I have here is not as pronounced, so I can just go ahead with the Y axis and scale this down like so. All right, maybe a little bit more. And then by scaling in the Y-axis, it's starting to flatten out some areas here. So we can use another modifier. Let's go ahead and click on the cog icon, and I'm going to use the taper deformer. So these deformers that I'm showing you are very specific to what I'm doing, the shape that I want to create with this sort of like semicircle, semi-sphere. But as you progress and as you get to know the different modifiers and what they do and explore them, because ultimately the best way to learn these deformers is just to play around with them. You'll find ways to use them in probably ways that I won't be able to show you, just because everyone comes up with different ways of using them, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this taper, which is going to be pretty similar in terms of the controllers, but it's going to taper the shape. So I can push this up or down. We can do a Hershey's caramel, or we can just, try to tweak it less. So I'm going to go for like a pointy version. And we have this other controller here. So this is the exponent of how much this curve is actually curving. So maybe I'm going to exaggerate it just so you can see. I'm going to exaggerate it like that. And then I'm going to use this other controller to change that curve. Okay, so that's what it is. I'm going to push it down. All right. So as you can see, this is a very, very useful way to manipulate a primitive, which originally was a sphere, and change it into something else. It's still very, very basic, but that gives an idea of what part of the character it is. So I'm going to click the cog icon again, click accept, and now I think this is too pointy. So this area is maybe too pointy. So we can go ahead and flatten it as well. I'm just going to flatten this part a tiny bit. Go back and accept. And of course, this is now too flat, so we can use the smooth brush to soften it. So I'm going to press Shift and just smooth it. Okay, so I think that's looking good. Let's go ahead and place it properly, because I think it is too small in comparison to the body. So bring in the gizmo, and I'm going to show you something else that is quite important in terms of what the Gizmo 3D can do. So right now, if I rotate the gizmo, is going to be done based on this pivot, or where this the center is. So this is something that I showed you when I was giving you an example with the dog project, but you can essentially unlock the gizmo and move the pivot freely or rotate it. So that is with this icon here, the lock icon. So if I press the Alt key, which is the modifier, I can actually access the lock. So I'm just gonna write it here so you can see it. So this icon, if you press Alt, you can toggle it on and off, right? And that allows you to basically change the pivot, right? So I'm going to hold the Alt key, and I'm going to click on the Y-axis arrow, and I'm just going to push this down. Whoops, sorry, Alt again. Now this is unlocked. I'm going to move it down. I'm going to try to position it around the base of this, right? So now the pivot is going to be here, and I can change and rotate things from this angle, right? That is kind of like the idea with the Alt modifier, to unlock and lock the pivot. All right, so let's go ahead and scale this up, move it down a bit. And I think this is a very important shape that we need to get right, so it's going to be quite big. Okay, and I think that looks all right. Maybe to rotate it forward. All right, great. So let's go to draw. And from the distance, this is starting to look like the cute character that this is. All right, so those are the basics of the modifiers, or the deformers that are within the gizmo, and there are a lot more. And again, it's more about exploring them rather than me giving you exact ways of using it, because you might find ways of using the deformers that I haven't thought of, and that's kind of like the beauty of it. So I'm going to leave this part here, and I'm going to go ahead and block in the shapes for the hand. Okay, this is again like a more complex one, but I'm gonna give you another approach to duplicating parts and dealing with subtools, just to wrap up this video, and then I'm gonna move into a time lapse where I'm gonna finish the blocking of these shapes. All right, so let's go ahead, and for that hand, so that one would be the right hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and append a cylinder, right? And again, remember the shortcut Alt and click, and that selects the cylinder. I'm going to bring in the gizmo, and I'm just going to start rotating this in place. I'm going to try to move it and try to get the rotation right, or the angle right, before I move it on top of the arm. Okay, I think that's fine. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in another deformer so that I can get a simple shape, not a cylinder. And I'm going to use something like, for example, let's see. Again, this is very good to just play around with them and see what they do. I'm going to use this smooth. So the smooth deformer, it has different cones or different controllers that allows you to change different axes as well. So if I click and drag, it's just using like a smooth operation on these both sides. So I think that's kind of cool. And we can control how much taper or how much smoothness is happening from this point to the center, or from this point to the center. So I can use this white cone to reduce it a little bit. Right? So you can create a kind of like a pill shape very quickly. Actually, like something like that will be fine. Click OK or accept. And let's go ahead and place this a little bit better. So again, this hand is going to be another very important part of the design. It's kind of like what balances out that huge head. So it needs to be right. Okay, so I think that is working fine. A bit lower. There we go. So that is working fine. I mean, could be a little bit larger, but we'll edit those shapes later on. So what I'm going to do is show you the next, another way that you can approach the creation of meshes, or the duplication rather than the creation. So I'm going to go ahead and add the same sort of shape that I have here for the hand. So let me go ahead and turn this off just for the time being to show you what I'm going to do, and then I'll show you how to do it. So I'm going to take this shape and I'm going to duplicate it within the same subtool, right? Rather than create a new subtool and have to deal with, a bunch of extra subtools for, the hands, the hand, the wrist, the the finger and the claws and all that, I can do all of that within one subtool. And that's another concept that is very important to get it out of the way early in this process. So I'm going to duplicate this and create another shape here for the wrist, and then I'm going to duplicate this and change the scale and the non-proportional scaling to do kind of like one of the finger, another one, and another one in there. And then I'm going to use the same shape, but I'm going to taper it to create kind of like the claws of this creature. All right, that is the idea. And all of this is going to live within a single subtool. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so with that tool selected, I'm going to bring in the gizmo. And instead of duplicating or doing anything like appending, I'm just going to hold the control key. So again, a very important key, the modifier, the control modifier, allows you to duplicate by dragging from the gizmo. So I'm going to hold control, and I'm going to click on this axis, which is currently aligned with the shape, and I have a duplicate. And this is very important for two things. The first one is that now this is a single subtool, and the second one is that as soon as we duplicate it using the gizmo, right, holding control and dragging, ZBrush is automatically going to mask the original one and allows us to manipulate this freely, which is great. So that way I can just duplicate, automatically this part gets masked, and I can just, tweak this thing. I can bring in a deformer like the smooth deformer, and it's only going to affect this new mesh, because the other one, although it is in the same subtool, it is masked. So I can go ahead and keep tweaking this as much as I want to. Accept, move it closer. So this is kind of like the wrist. And let's go ahead and do the fingers the same way. Hold control, and you can do it from any angle. So control, click and drag. And again, it gets masked out, and you can work on this separately here. So this is going to be one of the fingers. So I'm going to go ahead and place this. So, and this guy only has 3 fingers. Maybe a little bit smaller. Like so. Then hold control, click and drag. Maybe this one in the center is a little bit bigger. All right, and let's go ahead and do the index finger, or what it would be the index finger. Same thing, hold Control, click and drag. A little bit higher. All right, I think I'm just rotating around to double check that everything's in place. And one more just for the thumb. So I'm gonna hold Control, click and drag. Make it a little bit shorter. There we go. And remember, all we're doing here is generating the meshes to the block. So all of this is just so that we understand the shapes and the basics of the character. Later on, we're gonna, do much more and tweak them. All right, so I'm gonna leave this one as it is right now. I'm gonna hold Control, click and drag. Remember that is the shortcut to remove the masking, because right now this subtool with the hand is masked in certain areas. So I'm gonna hold Control, click and drag, and that basically remove the masking. Right, so obviously we have to add this close, but for that I'm just going to show you one more process. I know I have given you a few different options in this lesson, but this is all to show you that it can be done, and then you can revert back and watch this video again if you need to. So let's go ahead and add a new one. So I'm going to click on Append. I'm going to select the cylinder, and I'm going to select the cylinder here, maybe increase the visible count with the slider here at the top, and oops, I toggled that off accidentally. All right, let's go and bring in the gizmo, push that up so that we can see what we're doing. I'm going to scale it in the y-axis, then proportionally, and I'm going to use the taper effect. So the taper deformer, and I'm just going to taper this down to create the claw. Okay, and we can use this controller to change that curve. Great. So let's click the cog icon, accept. We're probably going to scale this a little bit more. All right. And I also want to flatten it in one area. So I'm going to click the cog icon, go to flatten, and I'm just going to push this like so. I think that's good. Click OK or accept, and we have this basic shape, but I also want to give it a bit of a curvature. So one thing we can do with the deformers is use the bend arc. So I'm going to click on bend arc, and this one has even more controllers. So things are starting to get a little bit weird with these deformers, but they all make sense once you sort of recognize what they do. So the orange cones typically deal with the axis of the volume that is drawn around the volume. The white ones just tweak the amount, or the so in this case the radius, and the green ones will actually produce the effect. So I can take this one from this angle, again rotating, holding shift to snap it to the side view, and I'll click this and push it forward. So that's going to give me that nice sort of curvature of the claw, and we can use the white cone in this case to shift that rotation, or the radius of that curvature. All right, so click OK or accept, and there we go. Maybe just a tiny bit more on the x-axis, and that's it. Let's go ahead and place these ones. So this is just going to be me moving the gizmo and placing it on the right fingers, and using the control and drag to duplicate, which I just show you with the fingers. So I'm going to speed this up, and I'll see you in just a second. All right, here we go. So now we have the claws are a separate subtool, and the arm is a separate subtool. If you want, you can actually merge these two together so they belong to the same subtool, but we're going to do that later on if we need to. Now, just to wrap up this video, I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick checkup of the proportions in the same way that I did before, in terms of comparing it with the sketching here. So the first thing that I can see really is that the top, the mushroom part, is a little bit larger in the actual sketch compared to the body. So I'm going to show you, using the techniques that I showed you before, that I've been demonstrating in this lesson, how to actually change those proportions with multiple subtools. So I'm going to select the head by holding Alt and selecting the head, bring in the gizmo, and I'm going to enable the multiple rotation and selection of tools, and by default, it remembers the latest operation, the latest selection. So that's the selection that we did before we added the head and the arm. So I actually want to move the head, or the mushroom part of the head, but not the arm. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, drag a selection here, and then Alt modifier to remove the selection. So now I can only tweak the head. And also I want to hold the Alt key to unlock this icon, or unlock the gizmo, and I'm going to move the gizmo towards the center here, or this area, and that's going to be my pivot, so that I can scale it from this area. So now I can scale from that pivot and just increase the size of my head. All right, so I think that's a little bit better, and I can rotate it backwards a little bit just to compensate. And let's go ahead and clear the gizmo, or actually turn off this icon, go back to draw mode, and there we go. All right, so I think that looks a little bit better. And again, just looking at the reference, I can see that the claws and the arms are a little bit smaller. So this is the whole point of this blocking, that it's going to be very easy to move things around at this point before we move into details and, tweaking the shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to select the arm, bring in the gizmo, and this is another thing that I wanted to show you. So because the last thing I did with the gizmo was this finger. All right, let me turn off the close. The last thing was just to arrange this finger. Then the pivot for this entire subtool will be in here. So the way that we can reset this is by clicking on this icon here, the one that is like a location icon, so the third one, and that's gonna center it to the volume. So I already explained that in a previous video. But the other thing is that the gizmo, the rotation is messed up, and this is one of the things that you need to remember. As soon as you change the rotation, the rotation of the gizmo is going to be based on the angle of the mesh. So in this case, if I would have just left the first part of the mesh, the arm, with the original rotation, we could have just go back and reposition this quite easily. But because we changed these and added all of these fingers, we can manually reposition the rotation. So to do that, I'm going to hold the Alt key to unlock the gizmo, and I can just manually reset this. Okay, also the position. So I can just go to maybe at the bottom, or sorry, at the top of the forearm, just trying to rotate things around, making sure that they look aligned from different angles. It doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as you understand what you're doing. And I think that's about it, maybe a little bit more. All right, so that is just pressing the Alt modifier, the Alt key, to reposition the pivot. All right, so now let's go ahead and enable the multiple subtools. And let's go ahead and clear the selection by holding Control and Shift. And let's enable the claws that we had. Oops, let's do clear the selection again. And I only want to move the arms and the claws. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, select that. And remember, the arm is actually inside this area, so it got selected. So let's remove that by hold Control and Shift and Alt. And now we only have the claw. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, just to make it more interesting. And if you compare it with the original concept, it's kind of like an important piece that gives somehow gives some kind of balance. And actually reposition this as well. All right, so let's go ahead and clear the selection, toggle this back off, and toggle the gizmo 3D. All right, so overall, I think that is a much better silhouette for the character. Of course, we still have to do a few more things, but as a blockade, it's starting to look a lot closer to what we have in here. And we haven't even started with all the clothes and all the assets, and of course, editing all of this so that it doesn't look like a bunch of objects or primitive objects put together. But hopefully you get the idea of the technique and the workflow with this lesson. It's all about finding the right shape that would match the design, whether it's your own design or you're following someone else's. So in this case, in the Ultimate ZBrush guide, you're just following this guy. So this one is just a half sphere. If you were going to do, let's say, this already, you can just do a cube, this little bag, or the medallion will be quite a flat cylinder, and that sort of thing. So just trying to identify what would be the main shape of what you're trying to do, and you can use multiple shapes, right? So if you actually want to block in some of the details here at the top of the head, you can block in a bunch of spheres, that are sticking out. But I wouldn't recommend doing this just yet. Just trying to get this right in terms of what are the main shapes that we can use to describe the silhouette. So the idea ultimately, or the underlying concept, is that if we put this very basic blocking next to the concept, you can tell, or someone else, if you showed it to someone else, you can tell, okay, this is a very basic version of this, right? So there is a similarity. You're trying to get the proportions right, the different features of this character right before you move into the next stage. All right, so this one turned out to be a slightly longer lesson than I thought, but again, I think I covered some of the important concepts that we need to know before we can move on. All right, so I'm going to leave this video here, and in the next lesson, we're going to concentrate on dynamic subdivision and further tweaking this blocking, right? So this module is all about blocking, getting the main shapes right before we actually move into sculpting. And I know that you might be very interested and really excited about getting into the details and all that, but I would say that this part is 80% of what makes a good sculpture and a good project, right? Getting all the basics right, getting, like if you're doing an anatomical model, for example, getting all the shapes for the muscles right, that sort of thing. And that all happens within the blocking stage and the sculpting before you move into details. But again, this is the ultimate ZBrush guide. We're going to cover everything bit by bit, but at this stage of the process, we need to concentrate on getting a good block out before we move on. All right, so that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video.